I'm Colin Sanders and this is the History Books Review. This episode is mainly given over to an extended excerpt from the book. There are many reasons for reading The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. For a start, you get to know a lot about Roman history. You also learn a lot about 18th century Britain. I hope, or at least aspire, to get these across to people who haven't read the book itself. But one thing my paraphrasing can never do is show just how good a book it is simply from the point of view of style. Nobody writes like that anymore. I've already done quite a few quotes that hopefully give a flavour, but here is a passage that demonstrates Gibbon's writing style extremely well and which stands alone as a piece of writing. It's an interesting bit purely from what it talks about, an example of one of the different ways in which the world he is describing is so different from our own. We're in the late 4th century and the empire is now largely Christian. The emperor is Theodosius II. The emperor himself, like his subjects, is impressed by the examples of Anachorite monks, who are individuals who subject themselves to extreme deprivations to reveal spiritual truths. Incidentally, the more commonly used word in modern English is anchorite. I've kept Gibbon's spelling, which is still in the dictionary. To be honest, anchorite is easier to say, but I'm trying to keep to the feel of the original. Although there are already well-established monasteries by this time, the Anachorites are free agents who devised their own ways of following God. The controversies about the nature of Christ had still not died down at this stage. The chief theologian of the age was Theodoret, who did his best to reconcile different versions of the relationship between God and his Son, but it was still up in the air to some extent. Given this, it's no wonder that some people took the job of seeking salvation into their own hands. Some of these took interesting and bizarre forms, and one of these is the story of Simeon Styllites, who, well, let's let Gibbon tell the story. At the age of 13, the young Syrian deserted the profession of a shepherd and threw himself into an austere monastery. After a long and painful novitiate, in which Simeon was repeatedly saved from pious suicide, he established his residence on a mountain about 30 or 40 miles to the east of Antioch. Within the space of a mandra, or circle of stones, to which he had attached himself by a ponderous chain, he ascended a column which was successively raised from the height of 9 to that of 60 feet from the ground. In this last and lofty station, the Syrian Anachorite resisted the heat of 30 summers and the cold of as many winters. Habit and exercise instructed him to maintain his dangerous situation without fear or giddiness, and successively to assume the different postures of devotion. He sometimes prayed in an erect attitude, with his outstretched arms in the figure of a cross. But his most familiar practice was that of bending his meagre skeleton from the forehead to the feet, and a curious spectator, after numbering 1,244 repetitions, at length desisted from the endless account. The progress of an ulcer in his thigh might shorten, but it could not disturb this celestial life, and the patient hermit expired without descending from his column. A prince who should capriciously inflict such tortures would be deemed a tyrant, but it would surpass the power of a tyrant to impose a long and miserable existence on the reluctant victims of his cruelty. This voluntary martyrdom must have gradually destroyed the sensibility both of the mind and body, nor can it be presumed that the fanatics who torment themselves are susceptible of any lively affection for the rest of mankind. A cruel, unfeeling temper has distinguished the monks of every age and country. Their stern indifference, which is seldom mollified by personal friendship, is inflamed by religious hatred, and their merciless zeal has strenuously administered the holy office of the Inquisition. The monastic saints, who excite only the contempt and pity of a philosopher, were respected and almost adored by the prince and the people. Successive crowds of pilgrims from Gaul and India saluted the divine pillar of Simeon. The tribes of Saracens disputed in arms the honour of his benediction. The queens of Arabia and Persia gratefully confessed his supernatural virtue, and the angelic hermit was consulted by the younger Theodosius in the most important concerns of the church and state. His remains were transported from the mountain of Telanissa by a solemn procession of the Patriarch, the Master General of the East, 6 bishops, 21 counts or tribunes, and 6,000 soldiers, and Antioch revered his bones as her glorious ornament and impregnable defence. The fame of the apostles and the martyrs was gradually eclipsed by these recent and popular anachorites, and the Christian world fell prostrate before their shrines, and the miracles ascribed to their relics exceeded, at least in number and duration, the spiritual exploits of their lives. But the golden legend of their lives was embellished by the artful credulity of their interested brethren, and a believing age was easily persuaded that the slightest caprice of an Egyptian or Assyrian monk had been sufficient to interrupt the eternal laws of the universe. The favourites of heaven were accustomed to cure inveterate diseases with a touch, a word, or a distant message, and to expel the most obstinate demons from the souls or bodies which they possessed. They familiarly accosted or imperiously commanded the lions and serpents of the desert, infused vegetation into a sapless trunk, suspended iron on the surface of the water, passed the Nile on the back of a crocodile, and refreshed themselves in a fiery furnace. These extravagant tales, which display the fiction without the genius of poetry, have seriously affected the reason, the faith, and the morals of the Christians. Their credulity debased and vitiated the faculties of the mind. They corrupted the evidence of history, and superstition gradually extinguished the hostile light of philosophy and science. Every mode of religious worship which had been practised by the saints, every mysterious doctrine which they believed was fortified by the sanction of divine revelation, and all the manly virtues were oppressed by the servile and pusillanimous reign of the monks. If it be possible to measure the interval between the philosophic writings of Cicero and the sacred legend of Theodoret, between the character of Cato and that of Simeon, we may appreciate the memorable revolution which was accomplished in the Roman Empire within a period of 500 years. I don't think Gibbon leaves us in much doubt where his sympathies lie between the representatives he chooses from the last days of the Republic and their successors in the early Byzantine phase of the Empire. I hope you enjoyed this excerpt from the book itself. There really isn't anything like the actual writing. Next time, we'll have a look at the conversion of the Germans to Christianity. If you are a regular listener, feel free to convert to being a regular commentator. My ambition, and it is no mean one, is for the comment section on the YouTube videos and the iTunes page to take on the nature of a great republic, open alike to the greatest examples of eloquence and erudition, and to the most specious depths of despicable folly. In the meantime, I'll exhibit all possible demonstrations of gratitude to you for listening.